But today, we have the honor of hosting Jess Walter, who's the author of 11 books, including a #1 New York Times bestseller, a novel called Beautiful Ruins, which spent an entire year on the bestseller list and was Esquire's and NPR's Book of the Year, as well as the novel The Cold Millions, which is a National Endowment of the Arts Big Read, The Financial Lives of Poets, which was Times #2 Novel of the Year, and The Zero, which was a finalist for the National Book Award. But just a little personal story here about Jess. This is actually his third time being at DMAC, and so when I saw that he was on a nationwide tour for his latest book, the acclaimed and best-selling novel, So Far Gone, he was going to be in Iowa City yesterday, he's going to be in Ames tomorrow night, so I was like, why don't you just, I emailed him, and he still has a personal email made available to the entire public on his website, and he answers each one personally, which is crazy. You never go to an agent, and he said, well, would you really make a little pit stop at DMAC in between the two events, and he immediately responded with a yes. But not before rearranging his entire schedule and making special accommodations just to be here with us today. So it's just one example of Jess's generosity. For when we suggested payment, he instead opted for us to simply buy his book and hand it out to our students for free. So, a little pause here. After the reading, he will be signing books. We have like 111 books up here, hardcover for free. You can just grab one. He'll sign it for you. And thank you, Jess. Okay. So we're overjoyed by his return because in addition to his novels, he's also worked in multiple genres, starting his career in journalism as a reporter for his hometown newspaper, the Spokesman-Review, where he was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. He also worked as a screenwriter, as well as writing short stories, which has appeared in 2 collections, and he's won the O. Henry Prize and Pushcart Prizes, and has appeared 3 times in Best American Short Stories, Best American Nonrequired Reading, Best American Mystery, and he's also written essays, criticism. His work has been translated in 34 languages. He's taught the Iowa workshop, but today, he's here with us today. So let's welcome Jess Walter.
Thanks, Mark. Oh, there's one there. Already a water up here. I am indeed on a secondary book tour. I started out doing 20 cities in 18 days, and which is great fun for me. It's kind of a weird thing, though. People ask what it's like going on book tour, and I say it's like being in America's least popular band. Carry your own luggage. If 20 people show up, you feel pretty good about yourself. And I'm so excited to be here because when I was here before, I had such great questions, and that's really my favorite part of this whole thing is getting questions and answering them. And book tour was a little strange for me. I'm a first-generation college student. I grew up in a very working class family. I'm the first male on my side to graduate from high school. My grandfather was a rancher. My father dropped out of school to join the Navy and worked for 40 years in an aluminum plant. And when I started becoming a writer, he was incredibly proud, but I have to say also a little baffled. I was doing this for years and had sort of built a bit of a career when he was still bringing me the newspaper want ads with jobs circled saying like, you know, I think you could work at Sears. You could do a great job in the tire department of Sears. And it wasn't until I brought him to an event and he saw that people were there listening and asking questions that he really understood what I did. But he also, I remember the first time I went out on book tour, I told him, yeah, I'm headed out on book tour. And he was sort of confused. He said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, you know, I go to colleges and bookstores and other places, and I give readings, and then I answer questions. And he said, you wrote the damn thing and you have to read it to him too? So as I told my dad, no, I only read a little bit. I like to just talk and answer questions. And he said, well, make sure you only read a little. They're adults, for God's sake. So on the topic of questions, one of my favorite things is when I get letters and emails from students. And my favorite kind always starts like this. Dear Mr. Walter, my English 101 class has been assigned to read your story, Mr. Voice, and I was just curious. What would you say is the theme of that story? Also, the protagonist's motivation. And could you identify any new vocabulary that you find? Now, I could respond to these, do your own work, but I started to think, like, how much work does it take to go to the author's website, find their email address, and then send them a note like this. And I started thinking, like, that's almost more work than reading the story. And sure, it's not the direct way into what a story's about, but what a great way to find out what the author thinks the story's about. In some ways, it was like going an extra mile. And so I started helping out with these "will you help me with my homework" emails. To me, the students were half slacking in a way that I totally recognized. The high school I went to was, I'm being generous here, a bong and nunchuck factory. And we read 2 books when I was in high school. When I got to college and I saw these bookshelves and I was like, where did you get that? And they said, well, we read that in high school. And we read The Great Gatsby and Lord of the Flies. Those were the 2 books we read in advanced English in my high school. And so, so for me, I could totally imagine doing that. I even helped one student with their paper on my book, We Live in Water, and she was thrilled. She wrote me back. She's like, I got a B. And I was a little offended. I mean, I almost called the professor. I was going to say, look, I know Caitlin sometimes takes shortcuts, but like contacting the writer for help, and God knows I've done B work in my time. But if there's one subject Caitlin and I know a lot about, it's the work of Jess Walter. But by far, the best email I ever got was from a 15-year-old. She was assigned to ask a living writer 5 questions. And she said, could I use you? And I said, well, other than my being living, is there some other reason you picked me? And she said, well, my mom dated your brother. She met him online, and he happened to have your email address. And I said, well, okay, well, are there any of my books that you want to talk about? And she said, my mom said I wouldn't like them. And I said, okay, well, what are your questions? So she sent me these questions. How do you get your ideas? How long does it take to write a book? But my favorite question was her third one. It was, did you always want to be a writer, or did you have dreams? Now, I assumed she just left out that word other. Did you have other dreams? But it kind of made me laugh to think, I wonder if she hates writing so much that she couldn't imagine anyone thinking this would be a fun way to make a living. But as I wrote her back, I said, no, this actually was my dream. I had 2 dreams as a young person. One was to be a writer. And I came about it pretty naturally. This book, So Far Gone, my new novel, is partially set in on a remote in a remote cabin where the main character, a guy named Reese Kinnick, who I'll talk about a little later, he gets fed up with the world and he decides to move to this remote cabin. When I was looking for a place to set the novel, I knew where to set it, and that was the remote cabin my family moved to when I was 8 years old. We moved out to a place a mile from our nearest neighbors, about 15 miles from the nearest small town, which only had about 220 people in it. And we had no running water when we first moved in. I had to break the ice on top of a creek and get a bucket full of water, take it back to the cabin, which had a wood stove to heat it, and heat the water on the stove for us to have drinking water. And so living out there by myself, one of the things that we would do for fun is play magazine. My sister and brother and I was 8, my sister was 10, my brother was 4 or 5 at the time. And we decided we would have this magazine. We'd write about what was going on in our family. My grandpa bought a new tractor. My cousin got a DUI. There was no story that was off limits. And we wrote it on scratch paper. Scratch paper, my grandma belonged to the Grange, and she would have all this paperwork, and on the back it would be blank. When I tell my kids this story, they're just horrified. You were too poor to own your own paper? You had to reuse paper? And I say, yeah, we did. But our magazine was called Reader's Indigestion. It was kind of like Reader's Digest, but with the word indigestion instead. And almost from that time, I loved writing. When I was 12 or 13, I used to crouch in the stacks of my middle school library and imagine where my book would go. My other dream was to be an NBA point guard. Well, who laughed? Can we have them thrown out? You may not know looking at me, but I was a pretty good basketball player. I was point guard on my high school varsity team. And it wasn't really until about midway through one practice my senior year when I sort of realized I wasn't going to play college basketball. And I think my coach realized it at the same point. We were doing this drill where you sag off of your player. The ball goes this way, so I sort of sag into the key, and I've got to keep one eye on this guy and one eye on that guy. Well, when I was 5, I got a stick in my left eye, and I have no vision in my left eye. I can't see on this side. So I'm doing this. I'm watching this player and that player, and my coach yells, "Hey, Walters!" He thought there was an S on the end of my name. All my jerseys said Walters instead of Walter. "Hey, Walters, stop moving your head like that." And I said, "Well, if I don't do this, I can't see him." He said, "Well, use your other eye." And one of the other players said, "Coach, Walters only has one eye." And I saw this look go over my coach's face right then, which I can only think meant, "Oh my God, we're not going to state, are we?" I have got a one-eyed point guard. We are in such huge trouble. And so for me, it really was a dream to become a writer once this basketball dream ended. And I've followed it from my bong and nunchuck factory high school to Eastern Washington University, one of the fine directional universities in all of Washington State, which I chose when I brought home brochures for 3 different colleges, and my dad said, "Which one of these is the cheapest?" And I said, "I think it's that one." And he said, "Well, you can go there and I'll help you with your tuition as long as you get a 3.0 and don't get anybody pregnant." Which I thought was a pretty fair offer from a dad. By midpoint of my sophomore year, I had a 2.6 and a baby. And so I immediately went the wrong direction. And this dream of being a writer seemed to get further and further and further away. And yet, it was always right in front of me. From that moment on, I was reading books. I was practicing writing. I worked for my college newspapers. I was writing short stories and trying to send them out. And that journey, that path to being a writer, turned out to be the same as if I'd followed my first dream, which was to go to the Iowa Writers Workshop just down the road here in Iowa City, which is where I thought a writer like me had to go to become a writer. Instead, I took what I like to think of as the service entrance into literature. I worked for newspapers, I did ghostwriting, I wrote screenplays when I could get those jobs. I taught in low residency MFA programs, but I kept honing my craft. Most of all, I just kept reading and absorbing the work that I was taking in, and then turning it into something that I really liked, that for me became the dream of what I wanted to do. I tell you about that path because I've been thinking a lot about artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and all the shortcuts that are suddenly available for writers. Now, my first real experience with ChatGPT was when I was notified that to build that database, they had taken 183,000 books without asking the authors and fed them into the machine so that they would have this all of this information and be able to use it in ways to to create a database that then they could draw on for all this information. And this was fuel that was taken without the owner's knowledge, and so I felt the same outrage that a lot of writers felt, that they were training AI with essentially things that they had stolen from us. But I also felt something else when I found out that they had only used 5 of my 10 books. I was like, what was wrong with the other 5? And I imagined like some computer somewhere saying, yeah, this one's a little pedestrian, or this one's just not my cup of tea. But then later I found out that Anthropic, another of the big AI engines, used all 10 of my books at the time. My 11th just came out. And that didn't make me feel better, I realized. My other mixed feeling was that literature is a kind of database already. All of my books are made up of the novels that I read and the short stories that I read that I loved that then went into the making of it. And so is there some way that we can expand on this database without using the tool in some way that it ends up using us. And that's what I came to eventually. I mean, if I was in a calculus class, first of all, I would probably get an F because I got a C- in advanced trigonometry and immediately bailed out of the whole math game. But if I was in a calculus class and told I couldn't use a calculator, of course, that would be, that would make that so much harder. So what are the ways to use these tools to enhance what we know and to not take away what I think is the most important part, which is the experience? And there's a real reason you need to do this. And I'll tell you why. MIT recently followed 54 people who use AI for tasks over a 4-month period. These are people who they told them, use it to write everything you do, use it to read the reports you're supposed to read, and let's see what happened. They tracked several kinds of brain waves, and they found a 47% reduction in neural connectivity. Neural connectivity is when your mind snaps and suddenly you can remember the name of a song and you can remember the name of someone you went to high school with. Just the ability to find all of those facts that you need. There was an almost 50% drop in how quickly your mind worked gathering those things when you use these AI tools to do the work that you were meant to do. They also found a 32% drop in cognition load. Cognition load is your capacity to process information, to take it in and understand it. There's a side of using these AI tools that is very much like smoking a cigarette that will decrease your lung capacity over time. And so again, what I would ask you to do is ask, am I using this technology or is this technology using me? Because here's a little secret that they may not have told you. Your grades don't really matter. It's a measurement of what you're getting, of the experience that you're taking in. Now, the one good thing I think about the revolution that's coming with ChatGPT and with AI is that it might force education systems to look for another way to measure the experience that you're getting. So it's a challenge not just for you to make sure that you're using the technology and not having it change you in these ways that aren't helpful, but also for the education system to say, how are we making sure that they're getting the great experience of what this work is? As Socrates said, education is the kindling of a flame, not the filling of a vessel. We're not trying to fill you with information, we're trying to light this flame that you then carry on through life. I'm not some Luddite who thinks you shouldn't, be able to use a computer or anything, but I really want you to look for ways that help you use these tools to comprehend more, not to comprehend for you. So if you're stumped by a work of literature, I'm all for Cliff Notes. I've used them before myself, and then gone back to the work and read it. I would even think of contacting the author and sending him an email and seeing if he answers. Sometimes that works as well. But we can get so caught up, the education system gets so caught up in seeing if you know the answer that you get so caught up in knowing the answer before you maybe even know the question. And that's where we should live in education. We should live in the questions. The poet Rainier Marie Rilke once wrote to a young writer who was eager for answers, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like unread books. Do not yet seek the answers which cannot be given you, because you must live in them." And that is the point. Live everything. Live in the questions now, and perhaps you will gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answers. And so if you find yourself using this technology to go straight to the answers, you aren't living in the questions. You aren't getting the experience you need. Another way to think of it is, let's say you decided that you wanted to take a trip to Rome, and you paid, let's say, $11,000 for your airfare and your hotel, and then you got to Rome and you sat in your hotel and you watched pictures of Rome on a computer for the next however long. That's the equivalent to paying for an education and then letting a computer do the work for you. You're not experiencing the very thing that you came there to experience. And so I would challenge the education system to find a way to look beyond grades and to measure the experience you're having through your passion, through the expression of what it is that you get out of it. and you know, because if you use those tools in the wrong way, what you're really doing is cheating yourself. Now, I don't want to spend my whole time lecturing about this, because this is something you'll decide on your own. And I hope the next time, though, that you find yourself thinking about those tools, that you'll ask how you can use them in a way that enhances your mind, that continues to grow that cognition. But I do want to read a little bit from So Far Gone, and then I'm going to answer questions. Now, what always happens in a question and answer thing is I'll finish up, and then I'll say, are there any questions? And typically, there's like an 8 or 10 second gap where no one has a question. And I have to tell you, if it goes beyond 10 seconds, I will burst into tears. And that's hard for you too. You're compassionate people. To watch a 60-year-old man who should be sort of confident based on that biography that you heard read, standing up there weeping is going to be hard. So if you have a single compassionate bone in your body, start thinking of a question that you might want answered. I'm going to tell you a little bit about So Far Gone. So this is a very topical book. I found myself, as you can tell, I've been obsessed with what technology does to us. Does anyone else own one of these? I'm probably the only one. One Sunday in 2024, in the middle of election season, this thing bonged at me, and I looked at it, and it told me I had been spending 7 hours and 22 minutes every day on it. I don't get that many texts or emails. I had been doom scrolling for 7 hours and 22 minutes of an entire week, watching what was happening politically, watching what was happening out in the world, worrying. Candidates were writing me and saying, I alone could save democracy by donating $2.50. And I was like, well, I'd better do it then. I was donating to candidates for offices around the country. And I started thinking, what is it about this device that is using me? I'm not using this anymore. In this way, it's using me. Politicians are using me to get messages across to me. People who want to divide the country are using this to convince us that our divisions are more important than the things that unite us, on both sides. And I found myself thinking, what if you could just get rid of that thing? Would that solve the problem? My character in here is a guy named Reese Kinnick, and I want to read the moment. This is Thanksgiving 2016. He has just come from his daughter's house, where his son-in-law, who is a conspiracy theorist, has tried to convince him that the NFL is part of a giant conspiracy, and it's been one conspiracy too many. And Reese has tried to step out to get some air, and his son-in-law has called him a snowflake. And Reese has made this horrible decision of punching his son-in-law and leaving his daughter's house for Thanksgiving. So now he's driving away. If he was going to call anyone, it should be Bethany. That was the right thing to do. She had left 2 voicemails, and she was the one he owed an apology to. All he had to do was press her name on the screen, and boom, even speeding away at 80 miles an hour, technology would put her here, right next to him, in his ear, his brilliant baby girl, as clear as if she were in the car with him. He turned his iPhone over in his hand. Remarkable. Every human connection he had was contained inside its miniature electronic circuitry. Kinnick didn't know a single phone number by memory anymore. They were all just filaments, bits of data in this device. He could rattle off the exchange numbers of his youth, Walnut 4, 9378, Keystone 6, 2454. But without this $600 Pop-Tart of modern science, he had no way of reaching any other human being, and they had no way of reaching him. But more than that, this device knew him better than any person on the planet. It knew his weaknesses, best happy hour near me, his tastes, 70s soul and R&B, his worries, erections after 50, his crude, sad desires, adventurous 40 to 50-something, dates only, not looking for a relationship. Even what socks he preferred, athletic, white, and black. It knew every place he'd ever walked and driven, and he was surprised to be surprised to see the phone fly out the car window. He had been the one to lower the window in the first place, after all, so it shouldn't have shocked him. but it was almost as if the act of flipping it out the window had preceded the idea. A quick glance in his side mirror, and he saw it cartwheel once on the shoulder and then disappear in the weeds between lanes. A lot of times, a moment of almost fantasy will start a novel for me, and that was the moment. I thought, what would happen if you threw your phone out the car window and you went and lived off the grid? Now, originally, what often happens to me, I like humor, and so often what happens to me is I'll start with something that really is kind of a joke. And so I thought, what if someone is so fed up with Trump's, let's say he's on the left side of the spectrum, he's so fed up with the election of Trump that in 2016 he goes off the grid and in a Rip Van Winkle way, he's gone until 2024, and he comes out and says, well, thank God that's all over. And of course, he finds out that the world not only hasn't changed, but has maybe gotten worse. And immediately I realized that wasn't going to be the whole story. What I really found myself wanting to write about was this deep division in the country now. Well, when I was young, there was a lot of talk of what was called the generation gap, where parents and children saw the world in a very different way. There was violence that came out of that. There were protests. And the time we live in now is very much like that, only worse in some ways. And I think of it as a reality gap. We are getting entirely different sets of information and then making up our minds in entirely different ways. And the person across that gap of information we dehumanize in some ways. And this thing is very much to blame. Yesterday there was a horrible act of political violence in Utah. And immediately what happens on here, it's like sports fans. Well, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. The shooter was this. No, he was that. Immediately people almost start rooting for the news. And this is another way in which we're not using the technology is using us. And so that was the initial idea, was what happens if you take this out of the equation. Now, the books I tend to write, I like to write with adventure and drama and, of course, humor. A good friend of mine, a writer, told me that I write a genre he called stand-up tragedy. Which was the greatest description I've ever heard. And I do look for the comic. And so there's a gunfight in here in which the police officer is going to threaten to shoot a guy's tires out so he doesn't follow him. And the guy whose tire he's going to shoot out loses his mind. He's like, if you shoot that tire, I'm going to have to get 4 new tires because they won't wear the same. And that to me is where violence and real humanity sort of intersect. But I quickly realized that what I really wanted to write about was, in this case, Reese, who has thrown his family away to go live off the grid. What will it take to get them back? And so this is a story where his grandchildren show up on his porch, and then his daughter has disappeared. His 13-year-old granddaughter is betrothed to the son of the pastor of the new Christian nationalist church that his son-in-law has taken the family to, and he's got to reemerge and try to bring his family back together. And in that way, it became a sort of hopeful book, which isn't uncommon for me. My son calls me a toxic optimist. And so even as I was writing about the world we live in and the problems and the divisions that face us now, and this reality gap, which I find very troubling, the fact that we don't even have a consensus about the information that we use to make the decisions that we're making, how we might one day get beyond that. So I'm going to answer questions in a minute, so remember, if you can, that admonition about not wanting to see me cry. But before I do that, I'm going to read 2 more small sections. One of the things that happens in the novel is I realized if Reese is trying to track his family down and he's got no cell phone and no computer, do you know how hard that would be? And that was such a great dilemma to give my character, and a great answer to the question, can I just throw this away? And this is how I came around to my answer. No, I'm not going to throw it away, but I'm going to use it. And anytime I find it using me, anytime it's using me to build up my anxiety, my dread, because that's what the algorithm is built to do. When they first started coming up with the internet, and they thought, we'll give you what you want. We'll get you we'll give you what you love. That's why there are so many kittens on the internet, because everyone loves kittens. But they found something really fascinating when they started doing neurological studies of people who spent a lot of time online. What really keeps us online is our anxiety. It's what we dread. And so along with kittens, you will get someone saying something outrageous and horrible that makes you nervous. You will get that you'll never be able to own a home because home prices are going too high. You will get a steady drip drip of what keeps you up at night. Because when you're up at night, what's in your hand? Your phone. What are you looking at? You're looking at that dread, and that's how you get bonged to 7 hours. I've gotten myself down below 2 hours. 1 hour is my goal. And in that way, I think I'll be using the technology when I need it, but not when it needs me. So I'm just going to read a couple of small parts as the phone starts to make its way back into Reese's life after all this time on the road. It won't give anything away about the plot. Does he get his daughter back? What happens to the militia guys he encounters? He encounters some militia guys who belong to a group called the Army of the Lord, and they had all their bumper stickers made before they realized AOL would make people think of their old email address. But this is Reese, the first time he uses a cell phone after he's been in the woods for a while. And I'll read one more section after that, and then I'd love questions. Hello? It felt so strange to Kinnick, holding a phone to his head again, 7 years after he'd thrown his own phone out a car window somewhere in southern Oregon. How ridiculous the whole concept of a phone had become. Going from the dedicated, oversized receiver of his youth, curved and cupped, fitting so nicely in your hand and covering your ear so perfectly, to this hard, unwieldy deck of cards that doubled as a movie camera, personal assistant, consumer tracking advice, and anxiety crack pipe. And then later, this is the last little section I'll read. This is toward the end of the book when he's back in society. I won't tell you what happens with his family, but he is somewhat reconciled with them. It was one of the hardest adjustments for Kinnick, owning a cell phone again. It was like a nosy neighbor with a constant supply of scary news, a pocket full of drip, drip dread and festering fear. He was glad to be able to call and text Bethany, that's his daughter, but the thing was a constant delivery system for terrifying developments from all over the country, from an overheated, overpopulated planet. Technology, as he saw it, had finally succeeded in shrinking the globe, so much so that every news story felt dangerous and personal, every war a threat to his family, every firestorm, hurricane, and melting ice cap a local disaster, the seas boiling up around them, every cynical, political, and legal maneuver part of the same rotten fabric, and half the country somehow seeing it exactly the opposite way. He tried not reading the news on his phone, but after so long away, it was impossible. Like he'd spent 7 years quitting booze, and then someone had given him his own pocket-sized 24-hour bartender. Carrying around this little harbinger of doom, Kinnick was constantly reminded of the cold epiphany he'd had about the nature of cruelty. Seneca had said it, all cruelty springs from weakness. Anyway, so with that pep talk about your cell phones, you can just throw them in the garbage here on your way out. No, but I would really encourage you to always ask yourself, am I using this or is it using me? And to really find your way into the books and movies and things that you love. This book has been optioned for a TV show, so next week I will sit down with a TV writer and we'll start working on it. Another story of mine, The Angel of Rome, is hopefully about to go into production, so I would love to answer any questions about books, about my path to becoming a writer, about screenwriting, about anything you might have. There's one.
My question is, what is like your favorite perspective to write in, like third person, first, second, and what advice can you give like inspiring writers?
I tend to write in all different voices. So I think of myself as a character actor. You know those actors you see in movies and you're like, I don't know that actor's name, but he's in everything. And that's how I tend to think of myself. I like to write characters outside my experience. I like to write third person first, third close, sometimes omniscient, where I can tell you everything about everyone. And I like to read in all those genres too. And the fact that you asked that question makes me think, if there's a persona you find yourself writing in more, look for people who do that really well, but also look outside it. Read, all kinds of different things. There are a lot of writers right now. One of the big genres is called autofiction. Autofiction is autobiographical fiction. It can kind of blend in with memoir. It's where writers are sort of telling their own lives. And very often that can be in the I voice. And that can be a really thrilling and freeing way to tell your story. But sometimes what I'll do as a writing assignment is I will alter that persona in a way that where I'm writing from outside myself. And it's a great writing assignment. I have a short story in a book of mine called We Live in Water, a story called Thief, in which came out of a writing assignment that I give students, which is take something you're embarrassed or ashamed of, and now reverse it and write about it as if you're not the person at the heart of it. So what I did with Thief is I decided I would have this dad, and he's a blue-collar dad, like my dad was, and he comes home from the aluminum plant in the bar, and he's got a big change jar, and he drops the quarters and dimes and nickels in this big change jar, and when it fills up, this poor family can go on vacation. But he starts to suspect that one of his 3 kids might be stealing from the change jar. And this drives him crazy. Like, has he raised a sociopath? So it becomes almost like a detective story, this dad trying to figure out which of his 3 kids, and he calls them girl, little, and middle. There's the girl's the oldest, the middle one is a very sensitive kid who happens to have one eye and wear glasses and want to be a basketball player. Who don't know who that could be. And then there's the little one. And of course, I was the thief. This was a way for me to write about but I don't reveal that until the very last line of the story. And by inverting it, by taking an experience you had and writing about it from a different point of view, it strengthens your muscles as a creative writer, because it teaches you empathy. Suddenly, I was in my dad's shoes thinking about this. I'll tell you real quickly, I got to the end of the story, and the dad figures out a way he's gonna trick his kids. He goes and gets a beer. He says he's going to work, but he gets a beer, and he climbs in his own window, and he hides in the closet, because that's where he keeps the change jar. And he's got his coveralls, and he pulls his coveralls, and he waits until he hears a kid pad into the bedroom, and he hears the top come off of that, and then he hears some kid squirreling around, and he grabs the coveralls, and he's going to pull them aside, and all of a sudden he thinks, I don't want to know. I don't want to know which of my kids I'm not going to like in this moment. And so he just sits there and drinks his beer and lets the thief escape with the 75 cents that he's gotten to go buy baseball cards or whatever. And in that moment, it was like I started writing the story as the dad, and then it was me again, and then it was as a dad knowing you wouldn't want to know which of your kids did this. So it's a great thing to do, to play around with point of view. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what are some of the books that you sort of absorbed that then sort of gave life to your work? You mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah, here's what I did, and so I think it's a great way for every writer to work. I have this journal, and I keep a list of all the books I love as I go. And I keep, as a writer, I kept thinking, like, what's my voice going to sound like? And I realized the books that I loved were forming the voice that I would then come into. And so I came up with this idea that I would keep a running list of 10 writers that I loved and admired. And then of those 10, if there were 3 that I had to start a religion like Catholicism and I needed a holy trinity, I would circle. And those 3, so for me, the first one was Kurt Vonnegut. When I was a kid, I used to crouch in the stacks and look to see where my books would go. And W came right after Vonnegut. So when I was a 13-year-old, I took home Kurt Vonnegut's book, Breakfast of Champions. And as a 13-year-old, when I got to page 6, and Vonnegut, he writes crude pictures in his books. And on page 6, he wrote, this is my drawing of an asshole. And he drew an asterisk. And as a 13-year-old, you think that might be the greatest thing ever done in the history of the world. And the fact that you can do this and people might pay you. And so initially, it was just almost the crude humor of it. But the deeper I got into the book, I started discovering this stuff that blew me away. Vonnegut wrote this book as a 50th birthday present to himself. And he said when Tolstoy turned 50, he freed his serfs. When Jefferson turned 50, he freed his slaves. And so I'm going to free my characters. He's been writing about all these characters for years. And so he goes in his own book and he tells his characters, I'm your creator and now you're free. And of course, his characters don't believe him. They're like, they're living their lives. They don't think that someone has created them. And he says, I'll prove it to you. And he snaps his fingers, and this character of his, Kilgore Trout, is suddenly standing on the surface of the sun. He snaps his fingers again, and he's standing next to the Sphinx. And he snaps his fingers again, and he's in the alley outside a bar where he's been drinking, where Vonnegut, in his own novel, has encountered him. And he says, look, I was your creator. I put you through all this hard time. It was all a plot in my novel. But now you're free. You can do anything you want. And tell me what it is, and I'll write it, and it'll happen to you. And Kilgore Trout can think of nothing. And so Vonnegut drives away, and as he drives away, and remember, I'm 13 years old reading this and thinking, you can do this? You can go in your own book and free your characters? As he drives away, Kilgore Trout yells in the voice of Vonnegut's dead father, "Make me young." And the lesson being, it's the one thing Vonnegut can't do for himself or for anyone, is make them young. And it blew me away as a 13-year-old. So that was the first person that ever went into my, and then the second was Joan Didion, who wrote these incredibly crisp, unbelievable sentences, and the way she would distill the language to get more meaning out of it. I always thought the bigger the sentences, the more meaning. But no, she would distill it to this point where the sentences almost made you ache. Read Slouching Toward Bethlehem or The White Album, and you'll see what I mean. She's covering the world in a way, and because I was a journalist, the fact that she wrote nonfiction also spoke to me. The third slot in my trilogy always changed. Sometimes it was Don DeLillo, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Edward P. Jones. New writers come into that third spot all the time, but keeping a list of 10 writers that you love, and then the 3 that really made you want to be a writer. Maybe J.K. Rowling will be in there, maybe the author of Dune, and you'll realize what I really want to write is this sort of dystopian sci-fi or fantasy or mystery, but it's a way to track the writers that are creating you as a writer too. I'll start back there and then I'll come this way. Yeah.
My question is twofold, I guess, and related. The first part is, when do you decide that your draft is good enough, that this is what I'm going to send to my editor? And I guess the second part of that is, how much do the deadlines affect that decision?
Yeah.
This has to be good enough.
Yes, yeah.
Send it out.
It was great questions about when do you know it's ready, and then how do deadlines affect that. I think because I started as a journalist, that was good training for me, because no journalist can come back and say, well, I went to the house fire, but I'm not really feeling the muse. I'm just not feeling it today. Maybe I'll write in 2 or 3 days. And so you had to write every day. And so I got the chops down to where I could write quickly. Now, writing a piece of fiction can take forever. I've had short stories that have taken years. My most famous novel, Beautiful Ruins, took me 15 years to finish. I wrote other things in between, but sometimes finishing it means asking what it's meant to do and if it's done it. And especially with something like a novel, that can be such a big, unwieldy question. But my answer is that I also record in my journals my false endings, and I'll be like, finish the novel today, it's brilliant, and then the next day I'm back in the novel. I realized that I should at least have allow some of the female characters a little bit of agency, and then I go rewrite it, and then 3 days later finish the novel again, took out all the female characters, and then 6 days later I write back in the novel, turning all the characters into female characters. And so you're constantly adjusting and changing and trying to find your way through. For me, there's a moment when I feel like I have completed the movement I started. Sometimes it's answering a question. If I were to write an essay about AI, I would say, have I answered my question? Have I explained the difference between being used by technology and using technology? I don't think I have. I think I have to go deeper. I might need more research. I might need more of this. When I feel like the movement has completed itself, it's not always a question. Sometimes it's a narrative movement. I knew that narrative movement of the story of the thief completed itself when the father put his hand on the coveralls that he's sitting behind in his closet, and then when he dropped them and decided he couldn't open it. But I still wanted some other movement, and so the movement ends with a sort of film technique where we pull back. And so I described the father sitting in a closet in a house on a block. That the house costs $37,000, but their interest rate is 15%, and he works 52 hours a week at this aluminum plant. And then I close back in on the thief, and the last line is, "The quarter burned in my hand." Because at that moment I'm admitting that I'm the thief. And so in the way you'd write a mystery, I've closed the shape, I've closed the loop, and solved the crime that the father set out to solve. Even though the detective, the father, never finds out, the reader finds out. So it's different every time. As far as deadlines, as a fiction writer, usually you're writing a piece for yourself and then sending it out. As a nonfiction writer, it's so helpful to have deadlines because they really force you to finish something. In fact, those of you who want to be writers, I would tell you to find friends who want to exchange work and then make deadlines for each other. I'll give you a short story on Friday, you give me a short story on Friday, even if it's just a fragment. Those deadlines can keep you working and keep you going on the thing you're doing, because that is one of the hard things, is staying in that bubble to work. Thank you. Yes?
I was wondering what your writing process is like, and how do you capture relevance even if it's not pertinent to the story?
Yeah, more good questions. Yeah, my writing process is, I'm a morning writer because, as I said, I come from a blue-collar family. I like to get up and work every day, so I'm usually at work by about 5:30 or 6 in the morning, but I have a secret weapon that I'll share with you now. I shouldn't, because now you'll all become writers and they'll have that much more competition. But I have these great big oatmeal chocolate chip cookies, and I thaw one at night, and then I make a latte, and I can't have a bite of that cookie until I've started writing. And so I do that at 5:30 in the morning, and I have a cookie and a coffee until about 9, and then I go get some kind of exercise, and I have my other secret, which is second breakfast. So around 9:30, I make eggs and bacon, and I have a big breakfast. Sometimes I even have 11sies, like a hobbit. So I love breakfast, and I sort of build my workday around, and I do it 7 days a week. My office, I love the way my office is set up. It's quiet. I don't check my email. I turn my phone off, and I put on background music that I love, and I just immerse myself. It's so hard now. It's another thing about this. It's hard to find yourself away from it. So I create this space that I really want to go to all the time. I also nap if I get tired. I have a little napping couch. If I've written for an hour and a half and I'm exhausted, I go lie down. But that combination of breakfast and then the last thing that really has helped me stay at work is I have musician friends. How many of you are musicians? Yeah, there are a few musicians here. If you have musician friends, you notice something. They never say they're going to work. They always say they're going to play. And I realize what I love about writing is the play. I love creating a story and imagining, how am I going to tell a detective story from the point of view of a father trying to find out which of his kids is a sociopath? How am I going to do this? And the play of that becomes so much fun. The play of sentences, the play of figuring out point of view, all that stuff to me is like picking up a guitar and trying to find a melody, or sitting down at a piano and trying. And so when I tell my wife I'm going to my office, I say I'm off to play in that same way, so that I remind myself what I'm going out there to do is one of my favorite things. If I'm writing and I'm stuck, I grab a book and read for a while. I just try to stay in that place. The process of revision, of course, is important. I'm a big reviser. Almost everything that I write gets combed over so many times. Because I was a dad so young, I was also a divorced dad quite young, and a single dad for a while quite young. And I used to describe my revision process. I start every morning, I go back over what I've written the day before, and then about every 2 weeks I go back to the very first sentence and I go all the way through to make sure the rhythm and the language and everything is cohering in a way. So I described that one time as like combing through ratty hair. You just keep going down from the top, and someone raised their hand hand and said, "That's a horrible way to get rats out of hair. You should go from the bottom." So I had to call my daughter and apologize because she had, all those years, her single dad had been like, "Come here." So it's a wonder she had any hair left at all. But that is a pretty good analogy for what it can feel like to write. Like you're just, yanking on your hair. But I tend to get to a place where it ceases being work and the time just passes. So again, those of you who are writers, even if you don't have that place at home, find the most comfortable place in the most comfortable coffee shop. Turn off everything except maybe some quiet music in the background and just let your mind go and let yourself play and find rhythm and melody. And if you're reading, the same thing. Close the phone. Even if you're reading a book about Iceland and you get curious about Iceland, don't break the spell by leaving that world. What you're doing when you're reading and when you're writing is you're building cognition in the same way as if you're in the gym just working out. And those muscles that you're building will help you so much, even if you don't end up writing for a TV show or writing novels. Whatever you do, that kind of thinking and writing will be helpful. And sadly, it will also make you a better human being, so, which also helps. I think there was one over here. Yes, yeah.
Okay, so how did you cut down on your hours? Because I know you said you cut down from 7 to almost 1.
Cut down on my hours of writing?
No, on your...
on my phone. So one thing I did was take a lot of things off that I didn't really need anymore. Like, I don't need to do the Wordle every day. And it's different, but instead of looking at the news on here, if I look on my laptop, strangely enough, and email, I've found that a laptop doesn't make me skip around as much. It keeps me in one place. Something about the technology here, I'll look at an email and it'll make me think, oh, I wonder if the Mariners are winning. And, there's something about the device itself that scatters my brain in a way and keeps me from focusing. And so it just became a challenge. The great thing about most technology is it's a video game. Those of you, if any of you have kids who are about to drive, the most brilliant thing I ever did was get my son a Prius, used Prius, because he spent the whole time trying to hypermile and get the lowest. So usually you have a 16-year-old son, you're afraid they're just taking corners on rails. And I would watch him drive this golf cart, try to coast everywhere he went, because it's telling him, you're getting 58 miles to the gallon, 58.1, 58.2. These things are built to sort of engage our game mind. So make it a game. What can I cut out that takes an hour off my phone? What can I do with that time? How can I experience the world and not sit in a hotel room in Rome looking at Rome on a computer screen, but be out in the world, breathing the air, seeing the birds. And the things that I do have on here are so useful. As a writer, you always have to know what plants are. So I have a plant identifier. So I'll use that. But I took off every game. I don't check my email on it anymore. I silence my notifications. There are ways to do it. But, and I'm not going to tell anyone they have to get down under an hour. That's just my personal goal. Yeah.
I've been teaching for a while, and
Yeah.
one of the first times that I used one of your short stories in my class was Anything Helps.
Oh, really?
And
Yeah.
I heard 2 of my high school students were talking about how they saw a man standing outside holding a sign up, and he was right next to a now hiring sign in front of a Hardee's.
Yeah.
And how this was the funniest thing to them. And so at that point I made a choice actually we're going to switch a story, and
Yeah.
did that. And I was just curious because that has been a very formative story.
Yeah.
Writing my own fiction and in my teaching
Oh, I
career.
appreciate that.
What inspired that? How did you tap
Yeah.
into this? Because I just tell people that's just 17 pages of fuck yeah.
Oh, thank you. Anything Helps is a story about it. So a lot of stories come to me almost by sound, and like most cities, Spokane has a homelessness issue that is heartbreaking and sometimes aggravating. Because because you're thinking well, help yourself. And so the first thing I wanted to do was create a character whose predicament was his own fault. Because to me, that's more heartbreaking. That's wrenching to know. So I'll tell you a little bit about the story for those who haven't read it. It's the first sentence that I wrote really told me how the story was going to feel. I talked about how Joan Didion, condensed sentences so much. I wanted to break this story down so that there was almost no extravagance in it at all, that it was the life of someone who lived on the street. So the first line of the story, the guy's name is Wayne Bittinger, and the first line is, "Bit hates going to cardboard." Now you hear how hard all those sounds are. This is going to be a hard story. It's going to be like sleeping on the street. And that Bit hates going to cardboard. And you're thinking, what's going to cardboard means? And that means where you have to get out a piece of cardboard and write on there, anything helps. So he goes and gets the sign, and he sits alongside the road, and one of the first cars that pulls up is a gold Mercedes. I wanted it to be magical, almost like Cinderella, like a gold coach pulls up. And the guy rolls his window down and he says, "I'll give you $20, but you have to tell me the truth. What are you going to buy with the money?" And they have some banter back and forth to where you realize Bit's a pretty funny guy. And so he says, "What are you going to buy with the money?" He says, "The new Harry Potter book." And the guy laughs. He says, "No, seriously, what are you going to buy?" And he says, "I'm going to probably buy a bottle of vodka, plastic in case I drop it, and some peanuts for my stomach so I have something solid to shit later." And the guy gives him the $20 and drives away. And it's this kind of heartbreaking moment. And then the next scene picks up at the bookstore in my hometown, Auntie's Books, and the guy is giving the $20 for the Harry Potter book. And of course, he's come up short, so the clerk has to help him out. And then what follows is a kind of odyssey as we watch Bit walk through this neighborhood, walk and walk, reflect on what a mess he's made of his life. He's been thrown out of the Jesus Beds, which is the shelter where he's been staying, and he's walking until he arrives at the house where his son is in foster care. And he used to read the Harry Potter books to his kid, and now he just wants to give him one. And this simple act of fatherhood can be a redemption for him. And it was just that idea that I didn't want to skimp on Bit's life. I wanted to show he's responsible for the trouble he's in, as we all are. That's what connects us as humans. It's so easy to look and say, well, I would never be in that situation. And the whole purpose of that story and the collection that it's in, We Live in Water, is that the line that separates us from that is so much smaller than we think it is. And we like to think that we're in a position because of these great decisions we've made. Sometimes we're just in that position because we're luckier, because something turned out for us. Having been poor, especially as a young father, and knowing that if a car broke down, I lost my job, and what happened to my kid then? Having lost the food stamps that we needed to buy food, and then you can't find them. These are tragic things when you're living that close to the edge. And I think we all live closer to the edge than we imagine. And a story like that does what fiction does. It causes you to empathize with people that you normally maybe wouldn't. And to say, so I love the fact that they noted that guy was standing next to a Hardee's. Now write a story where you explain why he doesn't work at that Hardee's, or that he even gets the irony of it and says to his buddy, we should move along somewhere else, or they cover the sign. There's a whole bunch of ways to still personify those characters, and that's what that was for me. After that story was chosen for Best American Short Stories, I felt the need to give $1 to anyone who had that exact sign, Anything Helps, on it, as a kind of royalty payment. So I keep a roll of dollar bills in my car at home, and anytime I see a Anything Helps sign, they don't even know what they're getting the money for, and I tell them to please buy food with it and not fentanyl, but that's not my job either. So yeah, thank you, and thank you for teaching that story. Yeah.
Total coincidence, I finished reading someone else's book last night. And when I finish reading books, I usually don't read reviews ahead of time or anything. And it was Bel Canto.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was reading a review, and you popped up for that New York Times 100 Things, responding to that, saying, I think, verbatim, fucking love this book. Right?
That might have been the language I used.
Yeah. And so I was thinking kind of with the prologue being...
Yeah.
The asterisk asshole
yes.
It, like decades later, having a lot of writing in your rearview mirror at this point. What are some things recently that you've just seen another author do that you're like, oh damn?
Well,
That was possible.
yeah, I mean, Patchett is one. Every book of hers invites you in and then takes you these places you don't expect. But it really happens all the time, and that's one of the reasons to keep reading and keep growing. And your challenge as a young person is to start building that mind so that it stays active and keeps working. As a person who just turned 60, mine is to keep curiosity open so that I'm not one of those people who's like, no good music has been made since 1984. Because I tell you, no good music was made in 1984. It's a wasteland. And so I keep trying to read new readers and read new writers. And I have to tell you, one thing that always makes me, that explodes my heart in passion is when I read a writer who has really worked hard to get published. So I just read a book by a writer named Virginia Evans, I believe, called The Correspondent. And if someone told you this is what you're going to write a novel about, you might have told her, I don't know if this is going to sell, but it's a woman in her 90s who spent her whole life writing letters to and from people. And the whole book is an epistolary novel. Now, when you write a novel in letters, it can be a really dead, boring, and what always happens is someone writes a really expository letter. Dear Mother, 13 years after you birthed me, I did this, and now I'm here, where you explain your life in a way you wouldn't. But she avoids that. She managed to build character through letters in a way that I never imagined. And then the most brilliant thing, so you read the letters she gets and the ones that go out, because she is a lifelong correspondent. This is how and there's a reason for it. It's brilliant reason. I think, did I say 94? She's 74. Anyway, there's a moment where she sends a letter out, very emotional, pointed letter, and no letter comes back. And I thought, I would never have thought of the dramatic potential of that, of not getting a letter back. And each letter is dated, so time passes, and you're like, oh my God, is her daughter ever going to write her back? And the tension this builds up, I would never have thought you could build tension that way. So I really enjoyed the novel, but this is what I loved the most. I got to the end, and the acknowledgments, she said, people keep telling me, this might have been an interview I read, the acknowledgments talk about the long path she had to publication. But she also said in this interview, people keep saying congratulations on your first novel because it's selling well, it's getting great reviews. And she said, and I don't have the heart to tell them this is my 9th novel. And then she talks about the 20 years it took her to get to this place where she published a novel, and how much better she got as a writer, and how much better she got as a reader, and the passion and the kind of resolve with which she chased that dream. I love stories like that. Paul Harding's Tinkers is another one that was rejected by every publisher. And finally, tiny little Bellevue Press said, yeah, we'll publish it. It'll look like a chapbook. It only went on to win the Pulitzer Prize. Ironweed, another favorite novel of mine from the 80s by William Kennedy, rejected by every single publishing house. He was in his mid-50s, had gone out of print, and finally an editor went into his bosses and said, if you don't publish this, I'm quitting. The book ended up also winning the Pulitzer Prize, becoming a classic and a movie with Jack Nicholson and Meryl Streep. And so I love stories like that. And so I love reading about underdogs who just kept at it until their work came through. So Virginia Evans's book did that to me the most recently. So maybe one more question. Yeah.
So when you go about writing, how do you go about, like, in terms of creating characters or world building? Because I'm definitely the type of person who, I love world building more than I like characters, because you can write a good story where the world around the character is the whole thing, and the character is kind of more of a blank slate for the audience.
Yeah.
So
I love world building. I wouldn't have thought of it as my strength. So I did read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi when I was a kid, and then we moved to a drive-in movie theater when I was 12 years old. And so, drive-ins used to be the big screen outdoors. And so I had a tree fort and binoculars, and I started watching all these 1970s auteur directors. And I really kind of fell in love with realism. But when I read, for instance, a sci-fi novel where they create an entire new world, Ursula K. Le Guin, the way, she could create an entire world of people, who have both genders. So it's a planet with people who have both genders, and what changes that creates. It also is an incredibly icy planet, so all the rules you have to build. I'm just fascinated by that. But I think those two things go hand in hand. I think the books we really love create a world that maybe is different from ours, but we find something of our own humanity in the characters, even if they have tentacles and flying cars. And so I think if that's the world you love, that's always a great place to start. And then to ask yourself, what else can go in there? That process of world building is especially big in writing for television or movies or things like that, because you're always looking for those small details that open up the entire world. And that for me is, it's such a great kind of writing. Almost everything that I end up writing goes in this. I jot down some idea and then later I put it in the thing I'm writing, because very rarely when I sit down to write is everything just right there. So if I've spent all day just jotting down notes, this will be a reverse gravity planet, where things just float away, and what will happen then? There's a great book called Einstein's Dreams that is. Each chapter is just a new way to look at the theory of relativity. So there is one planet in which the people build these buildings as high as they can, because the further out in space you get, the slower time goes, and so they'll live longer. And then the effects of how that would affect human beings. There's another one where time moves in reverse, and how that would happen. So it's a whole book of just different time elements. And I could imagine a book like that, and it's called Einstein's Dreams because each of them comes from notes that Einstein made. Each of these worlds that they create come from notes he made as he was contemplating the fact that time and place are are part of a fabric that is the same thing. So thank you. Another great question. Great questions. Thanks for having me, everyone. And I guess I'll sign books here.
If you would like a free book, if you would have me to sign it for you, we'll form a line here and we'll hand out the books. And thank you for coming. I appreciate your wonderful questions.
Yeah, those were great questions. Oh, if you could get that, that'd be great. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Oh, that's great. All right. Oh, right in front of the... All right. Oh, hello.
Hi, Jess.
How are you?
Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
You really inspired me.
Oh, good.
Right now I'm teaching 8 classes.
Oh, are you?
It's really hard to find, time to write.
Oh my gosh, that sounds, I've never heard of 8
Single
classes.
mom, too. So.
Oh, wow. Well, bless you.
What did you do? If you briefly, how did you find time during that period of your life?
I'm a morning writer now, but when I had kids, I was a night writer.
Yes.
I would get them to bed, and then that same quiet would come over me, and I would actually pour a tiny bit of whiskey usually. And and again, it's like I want this to connect in a way that's pleasurable. So I associate writing with. So if it's a glass of wine, if it's the music you like, but that combination of quiet and calm, and then I've been writing in my notebook all day. And then I sit down and just finding that time, of course that's when one of your kids is going to get sick or something. But yeah, who can I send? Heather. Yeah.
Yeah, those notebooks are helpful too.
They are.
Revising, because you can write down images that come across during a day, and then kind of close your eye and go like that to a page and try to incorporate it into character development.
Yes.
Yeah, it'll be like a merge.
And if anyone has to get to class, I'll sign them all so you can come back and get one. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Hi there. Who's this for?
Lisa.
Lisa.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh.
See you tomorrow.
See ya.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, BJ.
BJ, yeah. Where do you teach?
Here.
Oh, here. Oh, great.
Yeah. I had my students in lieu of class, they all had to take something from your story or your Q&A answers. So I'm going to go through these later and we'll jump in as a group.
Well, Mark's got my email. If there's anything
Oh,
really
well.
great, I'll need to see it. So, yeah. Thank you, BJ. Yeah. Hey there.
Hey, did I convince you? Actually, I already bought that one. Can I
Oh,
convince you to
yeah,
sign
of
that one?
course. Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah.
Cody.
Cody?
Yeah. C-O-D-Y.
How did the students like that story?
We had to talk about empathy.
Did you?
Yeah. And so we actually, what you talked about, so we got done reading that story, and I said, I know you guys were talking about this the other day. Let's pretend you're the hiring manager at the Hardys.
Wow.
You gonna hire that guy? You gonna hire Bit? And
I mean, and that's another great like writing exercise. All right, now write a story from the Hardee's manager point of view. Now write a story of someone working 3 jobs who sees, who's outraged by these guys.
It was fascinating just because it was in a small little Iowa town in northeastern Iowa. It's where I started teaching.
Yeah,
and,
wow.
Young people kind of not. They go to Waterloo, which is a very kind of impoverished area, and it's so different from their experience. And so it was wonderful in that.
I'll bet.
And I read We Live in Water for my specialty exam in grad school.
Wow. Where'd you go to grad school?
University of Northern Iowa.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you.
Are you ready for your ice pack?
Oh, yes, I am. Thank
Okay,
you.
perfect. There you go.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise, I can put it back in
No,
the
that's
freezer or
perfect.
whatever.
Yeah, thank you. Hi there. Who's this for?
Alexis.
Alexis.
Aleccsis.
O-A-L-E-C-S-I-S. Boy, they really tried to trick me with that one. I like it, though.
Thank you for signing my book.
Oh, my pleasure.
Officially say.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Hi there.
Hi, my name's Thomas.
Thomas? Yeah. You a writer?
Yeah, I want to go into film and screenwriting.
Oh, that's great.
I'm actually part of the journalism department at
Oh,
DMA.
wonderful.
Could really relate to a lot of the stuff you had to say.
Do you guys have like meetings sometime soon?
I'm at the Boone campus,
Oh, okay.
so it's
That's
a
great.
different
Yeah.
department.
Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's next? Yeah, come on in. We'll,
I'm Ellie.
Ellie.
E-L-L-I-E.